coming to you again to bring you a weekly devotional. This past week, I began reading a book called Hearing God by Dallas Willard, and he just made me think about some things that I just like to share some of those thoughts with you this week. When we think about hearing from God, we think of prayer because that's one of the ways that we hear from Him. The traditional ways that we say that we hear from God, we usually say that we hear from God through through the Bible, as we read the Bible, through as sometimes as we look at creation, we can see God in that, and we hear from God through our circumstances, and we hear from God through other people, and sometimes we hear from Him directly through prayer, through His Spirit. One of the points that Dallas Willard makes is that those things are all true, and that's the way that we sometimes hear from God, but those are sometimes more the mechanics of how we hear from God. And he goes on to point out that all those things can work to hear from God, but only if we do it in the correct context, in the context of having a relationship with Him. And he goes on to posit that we should have a conversational relationship with Him. We are all pretty good at having a talking relationship with God, where our prayer life consists of asking God for things and talking to Him and even giving praise and honor to Him. But sometimes we don't take the time to actually be quiet and listen to Him. And that only works is if we are in relationship with Him. He talks about it this way a little bit, is that when God created us, we are not robots. We don't do what He wants us to do exactly because He says so. He gives us a free will, and He gives us minds, and He gives us different personalities, and so we can respond to His prompting. But we have to have it be His prompting that we respond to. In Romans 12, in verse 2, it begins with, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know what God's will for you is, which is good and pleasing and perfect." We want to know what God would like us to do. We want to be in relationship with Him, which most of us are. A lot of us have been walking with the Lord for a long, long time. And if you're like me, sometimes that walk has been close and sometimes it hasn't been quite as close. And the important thing is that we continue to have conversation with God and we have relationship with Him. When we do have that relationship and we listen to Him, then it's kind of like when my wife was babysitting my little granddaughter Hannah, who's 4 years old. I came home from lunch one day, and Hannah says, "Grandpa, I made bread today." Well, yes, she helped Grandma make bread. Her part consisted of patting on the bread a little bit after it was done, but she helped make bread. When we are in tune with God, we're kind of like Hannah, in that we can do larger things because we're doing it with someone else. Hannah was able to make bread because Grandma helped her do it. And also, it was Grandma's idea to help her make bread. So Hannah got the idea that she wanted to make bread because Grandma was making bread. When we sometimes see what God is doing, that inspires us to be part of it and to want to do what we can to be a greater part of what God is doing. And the cool thing is that God empowers us to do that. He takes our weak, feeble efforts and He magnifies them, and He does things that we can't even imagine doing. Because we were kind of obedient to God's prompting, where He said, "I think I want you to do this." Now, we have to be a little bit careful with that, because sometimes we think, well, there's a exact way that God wants me to do something, and there's only one right and one wrong way, and if I make the wrong choice, my life is going to be horrible because I didn't do what God wanted me to do. Most people who've thought about this and have written about this say that's not quite right. You see, God created us as individuals, as people who He wanted us to be. He knows who we are. He knows our personalities. He knows our gifts. He knows our talents. And so we can do what we can do for him because of who we are, not just necessarily making a list of what, oh, this is what God expects, and so that's what I'm going to do. No, God has us be a little more involved in the process. And as he transforms us, like Romans 12 says, we then begin to sense a little bit what God wants for us so that we can make choices. And sometimes the choices aren't right or wrong, they're simply a choice. I was talking to a friend the other day, and they were trying to decide, well, should we go and be a part of this new church plant, or should we stay and be involved in the church that we're at? And in our conversation, it came out that, well, it can be a either or. And there isn't a right or a wrong as long as we're following God and serving him and trying to expand his kingdom, and whatever that looks like. You can do that in your current church, or you can do that in a new church plant. It's kind of a decision that we have to make. And so it becomes, God leaves that choice up to us. And that's kind of cool because, like I said, we're not robots. We get those choices. God allows us to make those choices in relationship with him. He created each of us for such a time where we can be used by him because of who we are, because of how we think, because of how he's made us to be, and we can do things. And when we do that, because we're in relationship with him, we, like my granddaughter Hannah, can do things greater than we imagined. So we can take great comfort in knowing that as long as we are in relationship with God, and we maintain that relationship, and we try to hear from him, and we stay in his word, we stay connected to his people, we continue to have conversation with him in prayer, and we can try and evaluate the circumstances around us, now we can say, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to be part of what God's doing. And we want to be part of that greater work of what God is doing. And I think as people, we are inspired to do that. That's why people do things that are greater than them, because they want to be a part of that. We can be a part of that too. We are part of a greater thing than just us. We are part of the church, the ecclesia, the called out ones to go and do what God wants his kingdom to be expanded to in this world. And we can be a part of that process. And that's kind of exciting. So, stay in relationship with God so that we can do his will and he can transform us to be the people that he wants us to be. That's our thoughts for this week. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.